as well for some of the policies, policy and potential political voice and advocacy as well. So I was just curious.
So the superintendent's consortium, we met for the first time last Friday.
Okay.
My not having only having this information about the consortium, the superintendent's consortium is more of a collaborative effort for superintendents to recreate the agenda together. So what's pressing in your district, what's pressing in your district, and how are you handling this? Is how
are there other things that might take, not that that's not a priority, but there are other things that would maybe drive more progress that we can measure, that we should be spending our time on, and should we prioritize time spent doing that? And so that's just kind of this is all good work. I know you're doing great things. But it's a matter of prioritizing the priorities. And I just don't want to get too far down this road and then we've got to fit in our district-wide priorities into. And I don't know how that might.
But are you saying that because we're under a timeline to meet the requirements of being underrepresented, that we push things in, but that certainly has to be part of where we're going. But we're under a mandate to do something.
Sure, and that's why I asked what
it can still change.
Well, and that's why I asked what the difference was
Yeah.
between the disproportionality report and this report. There's some extra things in here that we're doing that are different than what our plan was there. Maybe that, I know we have to do. I didn't realize that this was different than what we.
There are a lot of synergies between the two.
And then there's some things that are added and some
Because
things
that disproportionality plan is very, very focused on one group.
So if you see that plan, you're only going to see a focus on one.
Right, so this takes into account other members of the student population. It's not limited to that population. The disproportionality was part of it, and we wanted to have synergies between those two.
The goal is to impact your systems.
Yes.
So like find the bias and the errors in your systems that contribute, that are contributing factors to over-identification. So it's looking at economics, it's looking at how they your systems of support and all of those pieces too.
The important thing to remember is this is a starting point. It's not tried and true because we haven't done it yet. So we can start it, get it going, and see what's impactful and what isn't.
Well, so I guess that's where I'm concerned, but we're approving something like this and there's something on there that I'm not saying here that I support in any way, and yet you're saying this document can change. Sure, it can change into it going away, but I'm not really hearing that would be the case. I don't know how I could approve it and go forward and know that my concerns aren't being diminished or anything like that. So I guess I wouldn't know what I'm approving if it's going to be changing.
You're approving the starting point, Ted.
The starting point, the big part of it is something that
Has an element that you don't agree with,
correct.
and we hear that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to, we can go back and get you some verbatims of the student panel that spoke to our administration, that spoke to why this is so necessary. And Tiffany can share the data as to why it's necessary. And I hear you're concerned about the perception of the community, but it's not half of the community. We know statistically it's actually a smaller percent of the community would be concerned about having a policy around hate language. And we can get you to that in the background, but I don't, the expression, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're concerned about one element of the starting point is this one topic, why throw out an entire starting point because of your concerns that may be able to be addressed?
Or I could go the other way and go ahead and start it with both of them in there, and then we could add it at some point. I could say that as well. What I'm concerned with is once it's passed and it's done, well, it's like anything. Well, we're going ahead with it in whatever fashion we want, no matter what you say, because you've approved it already. I kind of know how those things work. It doesn't
But
change.
it didn't make it into the starting point because of a person's opinion. It made it into the starting point because of data, student feedback, administrator feedback, teachers' feedback. It wasn't made in a vacuum. There was no silo here.
Don, these are the focus groups.
Yes.
There's focus groups. There was also a panel. Yeah.
The parents in our focus group, we had over 40 parents, maybe it's even 45 parents that share these are the experiences and experiences.
I guess, you've got $100,000 budget for this. How is that $100,000 being spent?
So that's, it supports the plan. So last year we used it to, like when we had our student panel, we also had a keynote speaker. We had, Percy Brown was our keynote speaker for that day. He also coordinated all of our focus groups. So he did SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, for each of those focus groups with students and with parents to identify like what do our parents really feel about, you know, what are we doing well in Waunakee? What are some opportunities for growth in Waunakee? What are some barriers to growth? So he walked through like that whole SWOT analysis with each of those groups. So we're paying him as part of that, and then we also paid for some additional books for our DEI committee. We paid our teachers to attend the DEI steering committee meetings were all from 4 to 5 p.m. So they were able to get paid for that hour when they came to those meetings, those types of things. So some of it is staffing in terms of you can't really, as you know, you can't really pull 10 teachers out of the classroom during the school day, so all the meetings are after 4 p.m.
And the sheriff, this year's budget's going to PD, correct?
Anytime it's like an out, something that's contracted out,
Right.
yeah, do that. And then also any supplies, materials, books, things like that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 3-year plan.
Second.
Oh, okay. That's
Nope.
right. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
It all goes good.
Not the committee.
Any other questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
And I just am saying no because I would like to get more understanding of what the our teachers are going to get a better understanding of what our overall district goals are.
I think that.
So, Jackie, so,
So we can see it more information.
Yeah.
Because even though we passed it, we still want that.
Yeah. I don't know. So.
and we do need to work on the policy as board policy. I mean, I think the discussion we had here has been heard. I trust that was
And I would say to our plan in order to be responsive to safety requests, those things that are related to the new personality education, we didn't put in parentheses the DIS. And so we all know what, the area that, the specificity of what speaks specifically to, like, I think that would be, in terms of, the powers and whatever we can
Just to be clear, like, DEI doesn't say, here's what you need to do. They say, you have a problem, figure out what you need to do and run your plan past us, right? So it's not like DEI is dictating what we have to do. But
They say plan, what we do.
and it has to be based on data. So they want to see the data that we gather, so that was
I guess as we put these things together, we should have some metrics. What is the problem? And then we're going to, decrease it by 10%, 5%, 15%, so that there's direction.
yeah, that's part of the plan. There are goals in the plan, the introduction, the goals are and how they're being measured are laid out there in the plan. And so there were some suggestions to do some additional measurement around the elementary pieces. I think that does make sense. They feel like they belong at a younger age. That's probably gonna move into the older grade, so that we can suggest too in terms of that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving on to the facility committee meetings, we actually have had 3 meetings in the last month. We have a very small amount to vote on, but Steve, can I turn it over to you to kind of summarize what was experienced in the last month?
Sure, thank you, Joan, and thanks to the facility committee for your flexibility in the last month to come together 3 times. So for the rest of the board members to be aware, 2 of the 3 meetings were related to change orders that we were experiencing this summer in our projects. And one of the things that the facility committee discussed during these meetings was to have confirmation from the entire board that the process that we've been following should be continued throughout the remainder of the projects. And just as a reminder, the board did approve for the November 2022 referendum projects that change orders between 0 and 49,999, would be approved by the superintendent. Change orders between 50,000 and 99,999 would be approved by the facility committee, but not the full board. But then any change order over 100 would need approval from the full board. So we had 2 situations where we fell into the dollar amount where the facility committee needed to review the change orders and consider them. The first one was during the demolition of the Heritage Complex. So during the demolition of the Heritage Complex, additional asbestos was found in multiple locations in the property. Our district environmental management consultant attended the facility committee meeting, shared information of where that asbestos was, why it was very difficult to identify that asbestos up front during the bidding process, and talked that through with the committee. The committee did approve that additional asbestos removal and the project demolition of the old Heritage.
I feel like this kind of overall, this is just like that's just it is true. And I think this plan has been good. I don't know because I don't know what our from so that's or should the I think it should be other than
The district might be, it should be.
and so I'm thinking, like days of service, we're spending time this summer to do that. Are there other things that I take, not that that's not a priority, but there are other things that would maybe drive more progress that we can measure, that we should be spending our time on, and should we prioritize time spent doing that? And so that's just kind of this is all good work, I know we're doing great things, but it's a matter of prioritizing priorities, and I just don't wanna get too far down this road and then we've gotta fit in our district-wide priorities into, and I don't know how that looks.
But are you saying that because we're under a timeline to meet the requirements of being underrepresented, that we push this in, but that certainly has to be part of where we're going. But we're under a mandate to do something.
Sure, and that's why I asked what
It can still change.
and that's why I asked what the difference was
Yeah.
between the disproportionality report and this report. And if there's some extra things in here that we're doing that are different than what our plan was there, maybe that, I know we have to do, I didn't realize that this was different than what we.
There are a lot of synergies between the two.
And then there's some things that are added and some
Because
things
that disproportionality plan is very, very focused on one group.
So if you see that plan, you're only going to see a focus on one.
Right, so this takes into account other members of the student population. It's not limited to that population. The disproportionality was part of it, and we wanted to have synergies between those two.
The goal is to impact your systems.
Yes.
So like find the bias and the errors in your systems that are contributing factors to over identification. So it's looking at economics, it's looking at how they hear systems of support and all of those pieces too.
The important thing to remember is this is a starting point. It's not tried and true because we haven't done it yet. So we can start it, get it going, and see what's impactful and what isn't.
Well, so I guess that's where I'm concerned, but we're approving something like this and there's something on there that I'm not saying here that I support in any way, and yet you're saying this document can change. Sure, it can change into it going away, but I'm not really hearing that would be the case. I don't know how I could approve it and go forward and know that my concerns aren't being like diminished or anything like that. So I guess I wouldn't know what I'm approving if it's going to be changing.
You're approving the starting point, Ted.
The starting point, the big part of it is something that
Has an element that you don't agree with,
correct.
and we hear that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to, I mean, we can go back and get you some verbatims of the student panel that spoke to our administration, that spoke to why this is so necessary. And Tiffany can share the data as to why it's necessary. And I hear you're concerned about the perception of the community, but it's not half of the community. We know statistically it's actually a smaller percent of the community would be concerned about having a policy around hate language. And we can get you to that in the background, but I don't, the expression, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're concerned about one element of the starting point is this one topic, why throw out an entire starting point because of your concerns that may be able to be addressed?
Or I could go the other way and go ahead and start it with both of them in there, and then we could add it at some point. I mean, I could say that as well. What I'm concerned with is like, once it's passed and it's done, well, it's like anything. Well, we're going ahead with it in whatever fashion we want, no matter what you say, because you've approved it already. I mean, I kind of know how those things work. It doesn't
But
change.
it didn't make it into the starting point because of a person's opinion. It made it into the starting point because of data, student feedback, administrator feedback, teachers' feedback. It wasn't made in a vacuum. There was no silo here.
Don, these are the focus groups.
Yes.
You were speaking earlier this year.
There's focus groups. There was also a panel. Yeah. Yep.
The parents in our focus group, we had over 40 parents, maybe it's even 45 parents that shared these are the experiences. So it's very clear.
I guess, you've got $100,000 budget for this. How is that $100,000 being spent?
So that's, it supports the plan. So last year we used it to, like when we had our student panel, we also had a keynote speaker. We had Percy Brown, who was our keynote speaker for that day. He also coordinated all of our focus groups. So he did SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for each of those focus groups with students and with parents to identify like what do our parents really feel about, what are we doing well in Waunakee? What are some opportunities for growth in Waunakee? What are some barriers to growth? So he walked through like that whole SWOT analysis with each of those groups. So we're paying him as part of that, and then we also paid for some additional books for our DEI committee. We paid our teachers to attend the DEI steering committee meetings were all from 4 to 5 p.m., so they were able to get paid for that hour when they came to those meetings, those types of things. So some of it is staffing in terms of you can't really, as you know, you can't really pull 10 teachers out of the classroom during the school day, so all the meetings are after 4 p.m.
I did share this year's budget's going to PD, correct?
Anytime it's like an out, something that's contracted out,
Right.
Yeah, we can do that. And then also any supplies, materials, books, things like that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 3-year plan.
Second.
Oh, and thank you. That's
Nope.
right. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
It all goes good.
Not the committee.
Share
Any other questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
And I just am saying no because I would like to get more understanding of what the needs are, to get a better understanding of what our overall district needs are.
Can I take that?
So, Jackie,
we can still get more information.
Yeah.
Because even though we passed it, we still want that information.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'll
And,
check.
and we do need to work on the policy as board policy before we do that. I mean, I think the discussion we had here has been heard. I trust that, that was okay.
And I would say if we are plan to, in order to be responsive to Katie's request, those things that are related to the new Waunakee implementation, we can put in parentheses BIS. And so we all know what, the areas that, the specificity of what these individuals do. So I think that would be, in terms of examining what powers and what are being mandated to accomplish.
And just to be clear, like, DPI doesn't say, here's what you need to do. They say, you have a problem, figure out what you need to do and run your plan past us, right? So it's not like DPI is dictating what we have to do. But
Then
they
they
say,
plan what we do.
and it has to be based on data. So they want to see the data that we've gathered. So that was the
I guess as we put these things together in the future, we should have some metrics. You know, what is the problem? You know, and then we're going to, decrease it by 10%, 5%, or 15%, so that there's direction in what we're doing. And then monitor who these things with.
Yeah, that's part of the plan. There are goals in the plan in the introduction. The goals are and how they're being measured are laid out there in the plan. And there were some suggestions to do some additional measurement around the elementary piece, because I think that does make sense. They feel like they belong at a younger age. That's probably gonna move into the older grades, so that was a good suggestion too in terms of measurement.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving on to the facility committee, we actually have had 3 meetings last month. We have a very small amount to vote on, but, Steve, can I turn it over to you to kind of summarize what you've experienced in the last month?
Sure, thank you, Joan, and thanks to the facility committee for your flexibility in the last month to come together 3 times. So for the rest of the board members to be aware, 2 of the 3 meetings were related to change orders that we were experiencing this summer in our projects. And one of the things that the facility committee discussed during these meetings was to have confirmation from the entire board that the process that we've been following should be continued throughout the remainder of the projects. And just as a reminder, the board did approve for the November 2022 referendum projects that change orders between 0 and 49,999, would be approved by the superintendent. Change orders between 50,000 and 99,999 would be approved by the facility committee, but not the full board. But then any change order over 100 would need approval from the full board. So we had 2 situations where we fell into the dollar amount where the facility committee needed to review the change orders and consider them. The first one was during the demolition of the Heritage Complex. So during the demolition of the Heritage Complex, additional asbestos was found in multiple locations in the property. Our district environmental management consultant attended the facility committee meeting, shared information on where that asbestos was, why it was very difficult to identify that asbestos up front during the bidding process, and talked that through with the committee. The committee did approve that additional asbestos removal, and the project demolition at the old Heritage site continued. The second change order, the purpose of the second special meeting of the facility committee, was the Bethel Circle parking lot. So we shared information with the facility committee that during the month of July, we did receive an indication that parts of the parking lot were very likely to fail what's called a roll test, which is where they bring a truck out to make sure that there's enough base underneath the parking lot before it gets paved. We did share that information with Monica. We had a chance to look at the situation. We moved forward with a $18,000 solution, which Monica was able to approve, which was to provide additional base at the worst spots of the parking lot, and then to do a roll test to see what would pass and what would not. After doing the roll test, which we did have a district employee present and we had a third-party vendor present to do the testing, there was about 85% of the old parking lot did not pass the roll test. So there was an upcharge from about the $18,000 that was approved up to the low 60s to complete the remainder of that work. Just to be sure that that additional investment was necessary, we conducted an additional roll test. This time our civil engineer, Roxanne Johnson, participated in it, and so we went through the process multiple times to make sure that that investment would really be required on the parking lot. And again, for the second time, the parking lot did not pass that roll test, so that information was shared with the facility committee that did approve the additional base going into the parking lot here at Duffin Circle. In the end, we will have a much better finished product. And there were the committee did ask some questions about could we have known about that earlier. And we did talk a little bit about the difficulty in understanding what was below the pavement, the blacktop, or the parking lot that was out there. The reality of it is that the parking lot was built to standards that don't exist today. Today, parking lots are constructed with more base and are of higher quality. So the facility committee did approve that change order, which will result in more base and a higher quality parking lot. The third meeting, which was the regularly scheduled meeting, there's one action item that's come out of that meeting, but just some background on the meeting. We did have the mobile team in. The mobile team for the new Heritage Elementary School shared information about the occupancy permit that we were able to have for the new school by the end of July. So the team was here to share that great accomplishment with the facility committee. On the middle school, we shared information about where the status of the middle school project was at, and then also ended up with capital projects that are on your agenda for consideration this evening. And so we do have an attachment that goes with the capital projects that shows some of those additional requests that are being presented. One of the ones that I do want to note is one of the larger cost items on the list. We had the flood at Arboretum previously, as you're aware, and what we're looking to do is have Roxanne Johnson, our civil engineer, actually evaluate what's occurring on that property. Complete an extensive review of the water on that property to consider revisions to the site to make sure that something like that wouldn't happen again. So that's one of the larger requests that you would see on that document that's included in board book. The facility committee did recommend approval of those projects on a 3-0 motion. I'd be happy to answer any questions about either the two special meetings that we held or the regular monthly meeting of the facility committee, and then the requests you have in front of you tonight.
Just a question, Steve. Didn't you have some subcontractors?
That is correct. We did have a list of subcontractors at the middle school.
And I know they're later in the project, so should just maybe do those things.
Yeah. Yep, there was yes, thank you for bringing that up. There was a list that was presented. There were several categories on that list where a final decision had not been made. There were like 3 vendors that were listed that were still being evaluated. So we didn't have it finalized at the facility committee level. And so it's not on here as an action item, but we can certainly bring that back in the near future.
All right, so we are really just focusing on the capital maintenance. Motion to approve capital maintenance.
Second.
Any questions on any of those? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
Said really, told him he had to.
So Steve, are we on target to have the driveway parking lot completed by the date?
So we did have a goal of August 21st. And so the contractor did the initial $18,000 worth of work. And then the day after, the facility committee has then now been progressing with the remainder. It does look like it'll probably impact the schedule by a week at this point.
And thank you, Steve, for those updates. And I think at the end of one of the scheduled meetings, we're going to look at scheduling a tour for the Heritage Building and Rich, the general contractor up there. He's quite proud. It was very moving. Great fun. Okay, moving on to co-curricular.
So we had a meeting and Nick, our athletic director, presented the co-curricular report. I don't think I need to go through that with you, but the data shows that we had a ton of success this year, again, with our spring sport athletes. And academic success is correlated with being involved in the extracurricular activities. The grades continue to be strong. So there's lots of things to celebrate with our student athletes. And the co-curricular report is important to Thank you. So moving on to administrative reports, there's a few yearly things that come up at this month. The first thing is the use of district expulsion hearing officer. We actually have to do two things. We have to make a motion and agree that we're going to use an expulsion officer, and then we have to name who that will be. We have used an expulsion officer as long as I've been on the board. Mr. Well, I know he's not had that experience yet, but we always have a few issues that come up, but not many.
Do we
Very fortunate.
make a motion for both of them, or do we have to do them?
We do need a motion, and then it's going to be a roll call vote, but I need a motion that we will use an expulsion officer first. And then we will name him second.
I make the motion to use the expulsion officer.
Second.
And we need to do that by roll call. Katie?
Yes.
Judy? Yes. Me? Yes. Ted is gone. Jack?
Yes.
Dawn?
Yes.
And Mark?
Aye.
Thank you. And then the officer that we have used the last couple of years is John Anderson with Ash Blackwell Law Firm. I think he's done a great job. It's been very timely for us. And, okay, second motion by Jack, second by Katie. I need a roll call on that also. Katie? Aye. Judy? Myself, yes. Ted is gone. Jack?
Yes.
John? Yes. And Mark?
Aye.
Yes, he did ask for an increase in fees. I can't remember what that was.
Up to $7.50 an hour.
Yeah.
Not to exceed.
We're all good with that. The next thing that we do again yearly is to name a district medical advisor that usually sends a local clinic or a clinic, and Dr. Branham has agreed to do that again this year, so we would need a motion
Make a motion to approve Dr. William Ram as our medical advisor.
Second.
Okay, and again, we're going to do a roll call. Katie, yes. Judy, yes. Myself, yes. Jack,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
thank you. Next item is kind of talking again about student transportation for the location of our new heritage building. I know that this is kind of a revisit, but it has come to light that our hazardous transportation may not have been treating that area the same as our bus company measures and treats a mile from our other elementary schools. And I know that Mark has been involved and I've been involved, and Steve, I know that you've reached out to the bus company and got some different maps for us to look at, so can I kind of turn that over to you?
Sure, thank you, Joan. So I'm going to ask Rebecca to bring up the attachment that was included in board book and then just talk through this issue. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. So as some background, I put in the notes that the school board approved a hazardous transportation plan for the new heritage site at the May board meeting. The Dane County Sheriff and the Wisconsin DPI have also approved the plan. And so as a bit of a reminder, the plan for the new school references Highway Q and Highway 19 as hazards for students for the new Heritage Elementary School. And so this agenda item is not necessarily regarding the hazardous transportation plan, but rather school board policy 751. And school board policy 751 defines the mileage limit for all of our schools. That is a separate issue than the hazardous transportation plan. So the mileage limit for our elementary schools is 1 mile. When the board looked at the plan, the hazardous transportation plan for the new heritage, the board approved a bus zone and a non-bus zone that was different than the 1 mile policy that the other two elementary schools have. So what I did is I went to Lamers, which has the Dane County GIS system loaded into their transportation routing system, so you would get a chance to see some differences between what is done with a transportation policy and what is done with a hazardous transportation report. So Rebecca, would you scroll down a little bit? And another thing I wanted to point out is there's some points at the bottom of this map. So in order for Lamers to draw 1 mile distances, you have to pick a starting point to then draw the mile out. So one of the starting points on this map as an option, if the board wants to take a look at it, would be the same option that exists for the intermediate school, which is the intersection of Eldora and Woodland. So if you look at the intersection of Eldora right there, thank you, Rebecca, then there is a 1 mile distance that would go out from that location, which is indicated on the map. And so Rebecca, do you want to go to the very top of the email for just a moment? You want to keep going all the way to the page 1? Just make it a little bit bigger, just so everyone can see that. And by everyone, I mean me. So if you could see, the green zone is 1 mile from the Eldora and Woodland intersection, but just know that's what's used for the intermediate school. So then if you want to go back, Rebecca, down, we can show what the green area on the map is. So that green area, the green line, references what the 1 mile mark would be if Eldora Lane and Woodland was being used. And then if you want to go back down to the bottom of the map, please. And then Labor's also picked 2 locations that probably are aligned better with the new school. So the 2 other locations that they picked are the bus loop. So they picked the center of the bus loop that's basically right out in front of the school. And they also picked a spot on the, you go out to the new school and see where a parent could stop and drop their student off that could go right into the main office. That's right there. So depending on your thought process on what would constitute a mile for the new school, there's 3 options that we have presented with you tonight. One is consistent with the intermediate school. One is consistent with the bus loop in front of the school. And one is consistent with where a parent would drop their child off to enter into the main entrance. So Rebecca, if you would go up a little bit, so you can see what those options would look like. But as a reminder, the board action in May was that any student that basically was to the west of Q, so right in there, thank you, anyone that would be in that location and basically south of 19 would walk to school. So we've been working with the village on additional improved crosswalk locations and street signage, road signage, and the village has been very cooperative to work with us on that effort. However, there would be a difference between the mileage limit for the new school and what we currently have in place for both Prairie and Arboretum. And I know, Mark, that's one of the things that you've been thinking about since then, is there's a difference between the 3 elementary schools. I know you had a chance to do some driving out there to kind of see how far some of those locations actually are. And it's the reality of this situation is that absent the change to the policy, students will be walking further to the new Heritage than they do with the other 2 elementary schools. And so that's something to keep in mind. As we put in the notes about the policy, the really options for consideration tonight: continue to align the transportation for the new Heritage with Highway Q and Highway 19, revise the board policy language for Heritage, which would then not match the other 2 schools. Or number 2, keep the current school board policy for the new Heritage and offer transportation within the boundaries of Highway Q and 19 to keep consistency between all 3 elementary schools. And then we would also need to select a specific location to determine the 1 mile limit. And then again, the map has 3 choices on there that could be considered. So at this point, I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to share any comments, because I know we had a chance to talk that you were doing some driving and talking to some families in that area. Would it make sense for Mark to
Yeah, my biggest concern is for those families that at Heritage who have to walk a lot further than the kids at Arboretum or at Prairie. I really see this as one aspect of equity, particularly when we're talking about providing a safe environment for all students. Some students have a safer look than others. If we maintain the plan with 19 and Q for the Heritage School. I just reflected back to when I used to walk to school from 4th Street and I was going up to high school, how hard that was. And then try to think about kids walking from 4th Street to the Heritage New School, which is about another mile further than that. And it just didn't seem appropriate.
I agree. I think it's important to maintain consistency among the 3 schools. What do the other schools do in terms of, do they check the mile from the road or from the building door? I think that's important to maintain consistency.
Yes, that's a good question. So the board policy for, I'll give you the high school and the middle school. is to use the intersection of Knightsbridge and South Street. So for those two schools, it is that singular spot, which of course is closer to the high school than the middle school. But the board selected that so that it was uniform for those two buildings, which are fairly close to each other. Then for intermediate school is what is more typically done, really the intersection that basically would bring you into the property. So basically you just go out to the intersection of really the nearest street, right there where Rebecca has the mouse, is what we do with the other schools. So as another example with Heritage could be where the bus loop intersects with Woodland, could be another choice as well. And that one would just look slightly different than that. But Labor just wanted to pick 3 different spots to be consistent with what we do with the other schools. Where Rebecca has the mouse right now would be comparable to what we do for the intermediate school right there on Woodland.
I think it's important to both factors, so I would keeping that under communication.
Steve,
Heritage School itself, rather than the bus loop.
Whatever, where that intersection, where she has the most, because that would be consistent.
So
with
basically
what
where the street
Arboretum-
intersects with the entrance to the property.
It sounds like that's what Arboretum is very used to, so.
so if you scroll up, you get 2 green lines. The larger green lines was already approved, but you're asking for us to approve another green line. Or what? You understand?
Sure, yeah, I appreciate that question. I want to make sure everyone, because this is a little complicated with the hazardous boundaries that we have as well. So to Jack's question, what would be approved is if we look at the location that Rebecca had the mouse on before, we would go 1 mile out along traveled roads. So the path that someone would take to actually get to school. And we would then create a line at which north of that location, students would then be eligible for transportation. So it would vary depending on which of those pin drop spots were selected. And it actually would look a little different than what's on this map right now if the board were to select that location of Woodland Drive in the bus loop, because you don't see a line that corresponds with that. But if that was your decision tonight, we would then basically have laborers create that exact plan and then communicate it out to families with the bus routing information for the school year. So we have plenty of time to put this in place for the start of the school year. Our request from parents for alternative transportation was just due this past Friday. So bus routes have not been created. So we have plenty of time to do it. But basically, Jack, it would be north of the line that would be drawn with the spot that Rebecca referenced. If that's the spot that the board was looking at picking, we would go 1 mile out. That would be completely consistent with the other 2 elementaries. Now, it's going to get a little complicated because you saw with some of those lines, streets get cut. In particular, you have some streets that no matter what we do with this, there's going to be a point where there's going to be a house that's eligible and then the next house over isn't. We will do the best we can to work with that, but there's no question there's going to be some level of complication. We will try to use our best judgment to make it make sense for the neighborhood, but there will be areas in there where some of the north-south roads are going to be cut, where about north of a certain spot will be bused and south would not.
Didn't we have this discussion in May?
We did, yeah, we did have the
And we
discussion.
all approved it, and now
But yeah, what I came to realize, what we approved in May was a mile radius out. That's not how the other schools have measured. So when you do a mile radius out, it only looked like a little bitty piece that we would not include buses. But it's really a much larger scope of individuals, because if you have to walk the roads, which they have to walk, if you walk from up where those apartments are on 19 down, it's almost a mile and a half. Different than that radius that we saw in the hazardous transportation. It isn't how they walk. And all the other schools are measuring how the kids have to walk, not a radius. So I agree, we did have this discussion, but things have come to light since that discussion, which makes it really different for that.
Well, I think too, it's one thing looking at a map, and I think a lot of us saw the congruity between, well, intermediate can do this, well, heritage can do it, and look how uniform it is, there's no cut-off streets. But when you're talking about a kindergarten kid walking that far, without any supervision, it's a whole different story. And I think I saw from the communication from Steve, this is as many as 40 schools as possible.
I don't want to go too far down a different rabbit hole related, but not this. At some point in time, when we see what the cost impact would be to the district to shorten the high school and middle school's distances to 1 mile from where they are today.
Absolutely, yeah. Basically, Lamers has all of our student data from independent campus that is laid out on maps like this, so they can draw very easily new boundaries and then basically share how many students live in that location, so we can for sure do that.
I agree with you. So if you're ready, somebody wants to make a motion to select a 1 or 2.
I move we modify the transportation map to reflect the point movement and the bus ride and the 1 mile out from there for heritage elements.
First and second, any other questions?
Just had one more comment. One of the things we talked about tonight is looking at our overall transportation policy. I'm assuming that we're still on there, and this could change again.
Okay, so we do have a motion and a second, so all in favor of keeping with our policy and selecting that particular spot for our 1 mile measure, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this back. A lot of things. Moving on to our resolution for our referendum.
Thank you, Joan. So I'm going to take a minute and talk about each of these resolutions, specifically for any members of the community who might be watching that don't have the background that you as board members do, just to share a little bit of what we're looking at with these 2 different resolutions. So we do need to ask for board consideration of each of them separately in a roll call vote, and they do different things. The first one authorizes a resolution on school district budget to exceed the revenue limit for both recurring and non-recurring purposes. So I'm going to come back and talk about those terms in a minute. And then the second one is for the actual referendum election this November. So they each have their own purpose. So item number 5, if Rebecca would mind pulling the language up for number 5. And I want to just make sure all the board members are comfortable with what's included in this as far as what the language looks like. But for those in the community are aware that there was a community survey that took place this last spring, and there were 3 components of questions, financial questions, that were asked to the community. And each of those 3 questions is represented in this resolution. Those 3 components were to request the public's consideration for extending on a recurring or permanent basis 2 prior referendums, 2 prior operational referendums that are expiring at the conclusion of the 24-25 school year. So it's important, first of all, to note that working with Annie to communicate this out to the community, this question does not reference this district's budget this fall. So that's going to be really important for us to get that information out. We are planning 1 full budget year in advance. So if the public were to approve this question, this actually would not take place until October of the following year, when the board would have presented to you a consideration for a budget and tax levy. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So you do see in this question that there is the recurring portion and the non-recurring portion. So the title of the resolution includes both aspects. So back to the 3 components. The first component was the 2 referendum questions that were non-recurring, that are expiring after the 24-25 school year. The second component is referenced by the $500,000 additional increase in the revenue limit in each of the 2 years for the purposes of employee compensation. So as board members, the conversation that you have had regarding that topic is the hourly employees for the district are the one employment category that's currently compensated below the Dane County average. So the additional $500,000, which is what takes the number from $8.1 million to $8.6 million in 25-26, and the additional $500,000 in 26-27, where it references the total of $9.1 million, is to also include the compensation for hourly staff to get to our comparable average for a recurring basis for both 25-26 and 26-27. The third component that we included in the survey for the community has been included in this question as a non-recurring component. So a non-recurring component means it's temporary, and the board would have to go back to the public if there was a request to continue these funds. This was the portion where we definitely received feedback from the community on the community survey, and we responded to the feedback we received in 2 manners. Number 1 is lowering the amount. So the amount that is included in this question is lower than the amount that was included in the survey question this past spring. And number 2, it is non-recurring. So just be aware of the fact that the second portion, which is intended to be, so you can see the very end of the language, the second portion, the non-recurring portion, is for employee compensation expenses. So the point of that section is to have competitive compensation for all staff to remain as a goal of at average for all employee groups with our Dane County comparables. What was removed from this was any increase for non-compensation costs like bus routes or utilities or supplies, contracted services, was pulled out of the question. So the question really references those 3 different components, but please just note that the $8.1 million in expiring operational referendum funds is combined with the $500,000 for hourly employees in year 1, an additional $1 million in year 2 to form the recurring or permanent portion of this question. And then the second portion, which is the non-recurring, is for the funding that's listed at the bottom of the question the additional $1,050,000 in 25-26 and $2,100,000 in 26-27. Again, for the purpose consisting of employee compensation. So that's the question number one. I want to pause and make sure any board member questions can be answered at this time regarding those two questions, or the question with the two components, I should say.
In both of these, you have they'll be used for employee compensation.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. So the first part at the top is connected exclusively to the hourly employees, and the $500,000 in 25-26 and the $500,000 in 26-27 is being combined with the expiring operational referendum dollar amount of $8.1 million. So that's where the 8.6 comes from in 25-26. The additional $500,000 in 26-27 for the total of 9.1. So in the recurring portion, it is for hourly employees to get their compensation to the average of our Dane County comparison. The second portion, or the non-recurring, is to continue to offer competitive pay for all employees in the district to remain at the board's goal of being at or above the average. And so that's where the $1,050,000 and the $2,100,000 have been identified. And just to share with the community where those numbers come from taking the $325 revenue limit increase that the governor signed in the last state budget for the long term, and comparing that to the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, increases in wages that, the best of our ability to track that through the most recent update that we had. And the difference between the two and our compensation systems is the amount that's being identified up there. So it remains consistent with what we've done in the past, which is a CPI increase and the implementation of our compensation systems. And the estimate that the difference between those costs and what the governor signed in the last state budget from the $325 increase per student is the $1,050,000 and then the $2,100,000. But as board members, knowing that that is non-recurring and knowing that it is for 25-26, you will all by then have the ability to know what was included in the 25-27 state budget. And if in the 25-27 state budget, the revenue increase on a per student basis has changed to some other number, let's say instead of 325, it's 425, you would have the ability that fall to adjust as a board member. This gives you the authority to go up to that dollar amount. It doesn't require you to do so.
So employee compensation goes up and down with the state and CPI and all of that. That's what we're doing. Okay.
Steve, is it fair also to say that the impact on property tax of this total question really is 3.1 million, because we are already spending the 8.1 million in our current budget. And what we're asking permission to do basically is continue spending that money, and so that 8.1 million will have no change in the current property tax.
Right, so I appreciate you bringing that up. So what Mark is referencing is the two operational referendums, which certainly are the largest dollar amounts that are connected to this question, are currently already included in the tax levy for the community. So those two add up together to the 8.1 million. The discussion around tax levy and this operational referendum question is challenging to come up with estimates. We did put estimates in the community survey, because the reality of it is, in the end, the tax levy will be a function of the 25-27 state budget, and how much funding is put into equalization aid, increases in property values, not for this fall, but this fall and the following fall. So the best we can do is create estimates as to what we think that would look like, but the overwhelming majority of the funding that's included in this question is currently in the tax levy that our taxpayers are paying at this time.
Any questions? So, would somebody like to make a motion to approve this resolution?
Motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
And I would like to do that by roll call again. Judy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Jack?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Aye.
And the second one?
Rebecca, would you mind calling that out? The second one is a much lengthier document that includes all of the requirements related to actually calling the referendum election. So it takes the question that was just approved by the board and puts it into the legal formalities of what needs to take place to call the referendum election. So it's quite a lengthy document, but it's really connected to the approval that we just granted in the resolution.
Motion to approve.
Second. And again, I'd like to do that by roll call. Katie? Yes. Judy? Yes. Michelle? Jack?
Yes.
John?
Aye.
Aye. I didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
Thank you, sorry. All right, thank you for all of that. Yep, I know you have to. Do you have any announcements? So we're down to consent agenda. Reminder, we have our annual meeting agenda in there for the end of the month, August 26th, which really is usual. We have some short-term borrowing, which generally happens at this time of year. We could take everything in the list, or if you want anything pulled out or further explained.
I would propose we accept the consent agenda.
Second. Any questions on anything? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. All right, so the consent agenda is done, and we are down to setting agendas. Meetings.
We set the DEI one in our subcommittee meeting.
October 1st.
So unless there's nothing has to change, it should be set there.
Policy. Do we need to do something about it?
We do. So we were having a discussion around the request for building tours.
The building
prior to
tours.
the annual meeting.
So the annual meeting starts at 7, and we were wondering about starting a building tour at Heritage, the new Heritage at 5:30. Followed, if we have time, we'll stop off at the high school to look at some of the events there. On the 26th, before our annual meeting. So we have to be out here by 7. If we start at 5:30, I think we can get through both. We could, yeah, we would need that Heritage or something.
We gonna bite from one to the other?
Oh, I like that. Do we need to?
Will Woodland Drive be open?
Who knows what streets will be open. Is that bridge gonna be open in close to? You don't think so? That's a dead zone. I
how to use that. I like it out there. You can't get to you though. No. So, do we need to, do anything?
We just say
We're just saying, yes, we're gonna meet at 5:30, like it already said the end of the meeting. And are all of our other committees set? I see a whole lot of
policy, policy August 20th, 7:30,
right?
budget September 3rd, 7:30, facility September 3rd, 8:15, and then DEI October 1st, 5:30.
No, I talked to.
There'll be one set up, not there.
Okay, perfect, then I just have some.
What did you say, HR ones?
If we don't have an HR. We don't meet, Brian's back there, but he's not
Sorry.
paying attention. We don't have HR, do we?
No, we are still on a break unless the crowd demands it, and then we can resume.
We're all good. Okay, so I think we're all set. Okay, so I just would need a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Judy? Yep. We got time.
Sign.